Aloha and welcome to The Art of Life. I'm your host, Willow Chang Alion. We broadcast live every Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. right in the heart of Honolulu. And before we went live, I was just informing our guests that this is the last show that I'm doing here, not the last show ever, just in this studio down in the dungeon of Basement 30, because next week we are moving on up, moving on up. We're moving up to the 8th floor. So for all of our future guests, that's where we'll be. We're still in Pioneer Plaza, but we'll be on the 8th floor with room 888. And as us Chinese people like to say, most auspicious number. Anyway, it is a most auspicious day, and I'm going to tell you why. Because we have a fantastic guest. She is celebrated worldwide for all of her various cultural, artistic, and academic achievements in Oriental dance. We have none other than Aisha Ali in the house. Aloha, all the way from Los Angeles. Perhaps you've heard of it. So, Aisha, welcome to the show. I guess in the pursuit of journalistic integrity, I will confess I adore you. I've studied with you. I think of you as a friend, and I'm always inspired by you. So if you're, you know, all that good stuff, we will have it immortalized on the internet and live forever. But Aisha, tell us about your journey and how you got into the world of Oriental dance. And for those of you who are unaware, Oriental dance is a term that's often favored and used with great frequency in both the Middle East and the continental Europe. They refer to Oriental dance, what we might think of as belly dancing, and it's such a misnomer. But how did you get into this realm of dance?
Well, it started at UCLA for the Arab student group, because none of the Arab girls who were born there could perform. So I volunteered, and of course I didn't really at the time know very much about it, but I was one of those young ladies who thought I could do anything. And that's when I met Leona Wood, who had a group called Friends of Arabic Music, and we performed together at Sproul Hall, and that started the whole thing. I think I was with her for 50 years after that. But I learned as I went. I learned from other dancers who came from the Middle East in the beginning. They would go to New York and work on the avenues. And then sometimes they'd make trips to the West Coast because they wanted to see Hollywood.
Right, right.
And they would perform in the nightclubs where I was working. And I would watch them and study with them. And until 1971, when I decided I'm going to the Middle East and I'm going to get to the bottom of this and find out how the dance evolved to what it is today, and how was it 100 years ago, or where could I find the people who were closest to the origin of the dance. And I did that for many, many years.
So for those who are not aware, it's true. Aisha Ali, your papa was Egyptian.
Yes.
So, and I just want to clarify that, because there's a point in time when it was rather common for dancers and performers to take or assume stage names, whether they gave themselves their own name, or they were christened or given that name by a teacher or a mentor, a friend, a guy in the band. But you're the real deal. I mean, I say that meaning that you come from the origins of where a lot of these dancers are birthed from, and that's kind of unusual, don't you think? Because there's that stigma.
So well, there's well, for females, yes, because most of the friends I have who are Arab women who dance, they never did Raqsa Sharki. They always did the folkloric, either dabki or whatever, and they wouldn't be caught dead publicly in a revealing costume.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but there are lots of Middle Eastern men who are American-born who do it. They have no qualms about it, which is how I got into it, because there were no women going to UCLA, or girls, who would perform. Their brothers would not speak to them or their family if they found out. So
Right.
I had no qualms.
We like it. She's a qualm-free woman. So one of the things that's really notable, and there's so many highlights, so I have to say in advance, I regret we probably won't have all the time necessary to go over this illustrious career, 40 years in the making. But you went to the sources of the origin. So, for example, with the Gawazi, these once upon a time nomadic tribes, people, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, because that's always
Okay,
a possibility.
I will.
She's like, and furthermore, but the Gawazi, these tribes that by trade and profession are dancers to perform at weddings or social functions, kind of like maybe if you were born into a blacksmith family, you would learn the trade of making horseshoes or things like that.
Right.
So
And actually, that was the trade of the men. They were tinkers,
okay.
because they are, to be politically incorrect, they are gypsies, and even the European travelers of the 19th century who wrote about them and documented them.
Gustave Flaubert, perhaps you've heard of him.
As one,
right?
and Edward Lane, and a lot of ladies who traveled with their husbands who were diplomats wrote diaries about them. Well, they were gypsies, and the term Hawazi was just an appellation given to describe these public dancing women who were generally gypsies, but not always.
Not always, wow.
So the term really doesn't mean gypsy, or it just refers to a public dancing woman or man. Well, Ghazi is the act of raiding another tribe.
Okay.
And the male would be a Ghazi, and the female would be a Ghazeya, and the plural is Gawazi. So I had, it took me 2 years to really figure all this out in Egypt and Lebanon. But I was introduced to lots of different gypsy groups, but they weren't necessarily dancing groups.
Yeah.
And as I said, the men were often tinkers, fixing metal, doing metal work and so forth. And the women would perform at rites of passage, like a wedding, a circumcision. So they were important to the communities. And there are different tribes of gypsies in the Middle East. The Nawar is the tribe that I found where the Banat Mazen belong to.
The famous sisters.
And they're in Upper Egypt. So once I found them, I recognized them from the recordings. I knew the music already from the recordings of Fumio Kawazumi and Tiberiu Alexandru and Hans Hickman. At UCLA, we had access to these recordings in the archives, but they weren't out in the public. So I had been listening and dancing to the music for 10 years before I went there. And the first night I met them, it was on a ferry. They were performing on a ferry boat for a group of French tourists. And I was just thrown in with them to perform and keep my mouth shut and pretend I was one of them, because their agent was collecting money for me to be one of them, and in return I was going to be able to record the music and everything afterwards.
Right.
So I was able to fall right in because I knew the music. I knew all the changes and the transitions, and that was convenient.
I want to put it into a culture milieu, a perspective, because perhaps for some people, it's hard to imagine a life before Google, before Wikipedia, before all of these. You can do a search, you can hold up your Shazam, you can ID music right off of YouTube, you can see something thrown up on YouTube minutes after it's been performed or shared or created. And, and this is a completely different world. I remember parts of that world because I remember VHS tapes and all those things and rotary phones, but I don't know if people are cognizant of how radical, this is my word choice, it's radical as an American, as a woman of Arab descent, to go on these sojourns and these travels, to go with the purpose of not only learning, but to also bring that information back. So tell us how you did that, because you did a lot of ethnomusicology recordings, which are part of your catalog,
Yes.
and yes, they are for purchase.
Yes.
But you also did filming of the dances
Yes.
as well. So tell us a little bit about that process.
Well, I started doing these research trips in 1971. At that time, I didn't even have an 8mm camera the first time. I had a Rolly 35, and I had a Ewer. I did have a monopod that I carried around.
Yeah.
And the tapes that I used to record the music were reel-to-reel BAS, what is BASF or something?
Yeah.
And so they were heavy, and I had to have stacks of them, and you had to change them, and most of the time you had to thread the reels in the dark, and you didn't want to miss anything, so it was always, I was sweating, getting the reels threaded, and then often I had to dance too. So I had to photograph and dance and record and make sure that people didn't make noise. It came in handy. I was trained by professors at UCLA and by Leona Wood's husband before I went. But the first recordings I ever did were arranged by Mahmoud Reda at the Balloon Theater, and the government, the Ministry of Culture, had arranged for these Japanese musicologists to record their stable of folkloric singers and musicians. So Mahmoud got me in on this.
That's the Mahmoud Reda, for those of you who are listening. There's only one Mahmoud Reda, yes.
Sorry. And so those Japanese musicologists actually on site sort of helped me, showed me how to rearrange my mics. In that time we had 2 mics because we didn't have the dynamic stereo 1 mic. And I did pick up things from them, but on the other hand, their idea of recording the music was to go up to each musician and hold the mic and have him play a little ditty to bring back a sample of this instrument and this particular person's.
Kind of like a catalog.
Like a catalog.
Yeah.
So, and then the musicians would kind of look at them and then they'd go ding, ding, ding.
The cow goes moo, that type of thing.
Yeah. So I was sitting there thinking, this isn't what I want. So when they were all finished, then I would go up to the musicians and I would go and play. Can you play this?
Something more organic in
nature.
Yeah.
And then they would smile and be happy and they would start playing something and I would dance in the background while my tape was running. And that's how it started. But when I was in Upper Egypt and working with the Banat Mazin and dancing on the riverboats, after we would finish and take the tourists back to the shore, like around midnight or so, sometimes 2 in the morning, then we would turn off the motor and just drift down the Nile, and I would record the music, and that would go on all night. Because they love to play. 2 in the morning is very early for Egyptians. Oh yeah,
yes, they're very nocturnal.
Or sometimes I recorded in the desert, on the West Bank, and 4 in the morning.
Fantastic.
And that would also go on all night because each group would come and play for me from different villages.
Fantastic, fantastic. You know, would you have ever thought in that process that so many years later, there would be an enduring interest in what you do, or this inherent value in what you're doing? I mean, did it cross your mind? Did you know?
As a matter of fact, no, it didn't cross my mind. I was doing it for myself, and I never thought anyone else would be interested. But shortly after I returned, who was it, brought me to San Francisco, and I think I immediately had 50 students in a workshop in San Francisco that were like anxious to know about this and crazy about the music, and so it surprised me.
Rightfully so.
But it's less interest today than there was then.
Wow. Okay. Think about that, because I'm sure there could be some speculation on the reasons. This is The Art of Life. We'll be back in a short moment.
Hi, I'm Jay Fidel of ThinkTech Hawaii. Won't you consider helping ThinkTech? We're a 501c3 Hawaii nonprofit corporation, now in our 15th year. Our model and very existence depends on ongoing contributions from our underwriters. We are very appreciative for their support. We're hoping you will consider becoming one of our ThinkTech underwriters. Unless our underwriters prefer to be anonymous, we publicize them on thinktechhawaii.com and on our daily email program, sent to some 7,500 subscribers, our live stream talk shows, and our OC16 productions. With help from our underwriters, we have developed a high-tech video studio in Pioneer Plaza, and we now live stream 25 talk shows per week, covering science, tech, energy diversification, community, sustainability, and globalism for Hawaii. And we stream our earlier shows all night long. Our live stream is on thinktechhawaii.com. Check it out. We also upload all our shows to youtube.com, where we get 18,000 views per month. And we broadcast 12 hours per week on Olelo 54 and 3.5 hours per week on OC16. We also do monthly luncheon panel programs at the Laniakea, and we write a monthly column for the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. We're really active. Our plans this year include improving the coverage, content, and production values of all of our programs, and including more issues and guests relating to the neighbor islands, either by Skype or in person. If you agree with our mission, I hope you'll consider helping us. If you have any questions about any of our activities, or if you'd like to discuss our underwriter arrangements, please write to me at j@fidel.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much for considering this suggestion, maybe even including you among our underwriters. Mahalo, I'm Jay Fidel of ThinkTech Hawaii, and I approve this message. If you approve of it also, please give us a call.
Aloha and welcome back. This is The Art of Life. I'm your host, Willow Chang Alion. All of our episodes are archived because we love the archival process. You can find them on YouTube, and I also diligently throw that stuff up on the Art of Life page on Facebook. So if you want to be discreet and sly at the bus stop and watch the Art of Life, well, look at that. You can. Today, our guest is a wonderful woman, an academic, an artist, a painter, a decorator, a historian, all these good things, so many good things. If I were to just list all of them, we'd have no show left. But this is Aisha Ali, all the way from the heart of Los Angeles. Welcome.
Happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. So when we last left our heroine, she was deep in the heart of Mizar. She was in the heart of Egypt with her recording devices, and she was getting ethnomusicology samples of Gawazi music and all kinds of maybe falahin and different rhythms, and this treasure trove of cultural expressions of the music and dance of Egypt. Fascinating. So you came back to great fanfare. People were just chomping at the bit. They wanted to learn all of this stuff. What then? You have all of this stuff. Did you instantaneously turn them into recordings, or was it overwhelming? Or, I mean, we want to know.
Yeah, well, in those days, it was the LP.
Long playing.
Yeah. So the first recording I released was called Music of the Gawazi.
Okay.
And that came out on LP. And it was all a variety of folk musicians. Like I said, they would come from different areas and play. And I would record them in the dead calm of night.
Right.
And then I released a second one called Music of the Falahin. Now, it was the same musicians, it was the same kind of music, but interestingly enough, because people knew Gawazi, that meant this dance and this music, the second one, which was even better than the first one, well, not really, they're both good, but they're both a little different.
Yeah.
that one didn't sell well because
These
the
farmers get no respect.
Right, because fellahin means peasant. So people, well, I don't want to dance to peasant music.
Ouch.
So, but they should know that album has lots of very good Gawazi music on it.
It's juicy.
And so music of the fellahin the music of the Gawazi is music of the fellahin because the Gawazi perform for the fellahin.
There you go. Now, you've gone outside of Egypt. You've also done a lot of field work studies in other parts of Northern Africa, including
Yes.
Tunisia. So tell us about that.
Well, in Tunisia, I knew ahead of time about Salah al-Mahdi, who was the director of the Ministry of Culture. And the first time I went to Tunisia, I went to Tunis to look him up, and he wasn't there. So he was out of the country at the time. So I toured all over, and I collected music everywhere, and I even danced in Sfax for the Dar Shab on their Independence Day, and they loved it, and they wanted me to start a dance company in Sfax and teach the local girls and do choreography. And but they offered me a house and a servant and a chauffeur with a car.
Where's the livestock?
No livestock.
That was what broke the deal right there.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't have paid, the salary wouldn't have paid for my studio back in LA and my house mortgage, so I had to forego it, but it would have been a wonderful experience. Anyhow, after I collected all that music, I released an album, and I gave credit to Salah Mahdi because I thought that would give it legitimacy.
Yeah.
So this next time I went to Tunis and I found him there, he was very, very nice to me, and he even did an itinerary, and he arranged for me to go to this town and this town and this town, and the musicians would be waiting for me.
Right.
And I got a wonderful selection of folk music from Tunisia in places where nobody would have known about.
Now, you have this body of work that represents folk dances of the people, but you also have a parallel career of doing dances that are very stylized, like the Raqs Sharqi. So would you say that it was expected, or is that ideal? Like, some people feel that they have to pick and choose. Like, some people say, oh, I only do folkloric dance forms, or I do stylized dance forms. Stylized is probably a poor choice, but I don't want to necessarily say nightclub. So when people use the word cabaret, it holds different connotations here than it would in, say, the UK or even the Middle East.
Yes,
it can mean everything from high class to tawdry, depending on who's defining that. So if maybe let's say things that are for stage versus things that are done for the people. Wow, I think there's a question in there somewhere.
Yes, I know the question.
Yeah, how were you able to navigate being able to do both of these? Because I don't think it's necessarily common where a lot of dancers have an interest, let alone an ability, like a language, to do both folkloric and these stage dances.
Yes. Well, first of all, it was the stage dancing, the cabaret, and the nightclub that financed all my research and all my productions. And I couldn't have done it without that. I made very good money as an Oriental dancer, doing Raqs Sharqi in nightclubs all over the world. Well, not all over the world, but wherever I went.
Yeah.
So, and then plus having an Arab name and coming from an academic background and being a proficient dancer was all in my favor.
She's being very modest right now.
Because I was able to, first of all, I was able to work in government hotels, like the Winter Palace in Luxor, because I had a Muslim name, and because I had a father with a Muslim name, and actually at one time a husband with a Muslim name, but I wasn't using his name. So that helped me. it was hard to get hotels as a single female with a Muslim name. That was against me. If I had had an American name, it would have been easier for me. But I really had a hard time getting hotels because they thought that I was a lady of the evening.
And I will say, when I was working in Egypt, 1994, and we were, contracted artists in residence at Swiss Hotel in Heliopolis, they would make a note every time we left the hotel. They had a ledger, and when we would return and we were not allowed to have any guests, male or female, in our hotel rooms, because they were trying to fight this misconception that if you're a female entertainer, then you must be doing illicit activity. And I was completely unaware that there was that association with entertainers. So even as recent, and it's not even that recent, but like 1994, they still had this idea, or if you went to the disco alone.
It's worse now.
Oh. Oops, the cat's out of the bag. Hate to burst your bubble, all of you fans out there. But, it makes it that much more interesting, the different types of hurdles that you were able to hop over each of these things.
I've had so many experiences. It's amazing that I came out unharmed because I had so many close calls.
Exactly. Now, you've seen the dance, as with any type of activity, if you're involved, whether that's, I don't know, race car driving, or maybe you collect comic books, or you're into Ikebana. I mean, when you spend any length of time with a passion or an interest, you're bound to see changes within the community. What would you say have been some of the changes within the community? There's probably plenty of them.
Oh, yes. And each community is different.
Right.
But let's start with Southern California, well, all of California, because I performed in North Beach and Southern California. When I first came back, after having performed with an Egyptian orchestra, I was somehow unhappy with the music that was available.
Please just refer to that as that you were spoiled.
I was spoiled. I was used to the musicians there. Are usually paid by the dancer, for one thing. So they obey her.
And that's an interesting thing, because anyone who thinks, oh, the poor dancer, she has no status, she actually is in a position of having status because she pays out the musicians.
And they work for her and make her look good. Whereas over here, they were in competition with us and they make us look bad. So that was the first thing. I tried to introduce the new music and the new movements, and people didn't accept it right away. First of all, they thought the Egyptian dancers didn't move fast enough. And over here in California, well, we're in Hawaii now. In California, it was mostly Turkish and Armenian musicians and Lebanese.
I was going to say Lebanese.
And so the music was very fast. The first place I worked was the Greek Village, and it was dun 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 dun, and you sort of galloped around and did lots of twirling.
I think of it as like itchy, syncopated, cheerleading, high energy, boisterous, those are great for entertainment venues, but not always that time for that internal reflective qualities that the Egyptians are so renowned for.
Exactly. It's not laid back and it's not sensuous. And well, I shouldn't say that, because the Turkish style would go like dun, 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 and then it'll go dum 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 dum, and it would slow down and be ultra sultry and sensuous. So it's just different cultures and different styles. And sometimes, and after a while, I started thinking, how did we dance before? Trying to remember. And some of the dancers never evolved from that style. It was kind of a flower child of the 60s and 70s style that had developed during the Renaissance fairs. And
would you classify that as what some refer to as the American cabaret style?
Yeah.
Kind of like a pastiche, or almost like mezza, like when you go and you have all these different poo-poos from different parts of the Levant or the Middle East. It's almost like the dance reflects that. Like, here's something from Lebanon, here's something from Turkey,
right.
here's a rumba. Remember back in the day when people danced to rumba and they did their floor
samba.
work? And all those things.
Yes. Well, it all makes it all interesting. But as far as the combination of things, I go by the music. So if the music is Tunisian, I'm going to respond with Tunisian moves and attitude and stature. If it's Egyptian, if from this region or that region or that region, because in Egypt there's many styles, I would respond to that. But when I do Oriental dance, which is kind of international, Raqs Sharqi, then I can borrow something from Tunisian and borrow something from the Ghawazi style and put it all together, and it will still come out Egyptian Raqs Sharqi, but you benefit from knowing all of these different movements.
We have to cut to a commercial, which makes me so sad. But we'll be back because you said something that really made my little synapses go, ooh, ooh, ooh. This is the art of life.
This is Alice Lee Hagan, host of ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. My show here at ThinkTech Hawaii is every Thursday from 3 to 4 in the afternoon. I bring in interesting guests from Hawaii, the mainland, and hopefully international guests in the future. Do join us on Thursday from 3 to 4 p.m. ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. Aloha.
Hi, I'm your host on ThinkTech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, ThinkTech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Aloha and welcome back. This is The Art of Life, the show where we always have very interesting guests with so much to share and never enough time. Our guest certainly fits the bill. This is Miss Aisha Ali, representing the arts and the culture of the Middle Eastern dance and music. Welcome. So many things that you do and so little time. So I'm going to do a little fast forward because there are lots of articles and resource materials out there about your amazing, illustrious career. I am certainly not the first person to interview Miss Aisha. So I want to ask you something. You had said that you like to invoke the feeling, I'm paraphrasing here, the feeling or maybe the mood or the attitude that you associate with these different dances in these different regions. And you had specified, you know, of course, with Egypt, there's many different feelings, and that can be said of any place. But if you were to say, like, when you do your Tunisian dance, what would you say is kind of the feeling or the emotive quality or the mood? Like, what is it that you want to embody?
Well, first of all, it's very syncopated rhythms. And it's the dancer is like one with the drum. So that when she comes forward and her hip swivels forward and her weight comes down right on the beat. So it looks like she's playing the drum with her movements, with her hips and her feet. And her body attitude is it's upward and forward. That was the first thing I noticed the first time I saw a Tunisian dancer. Like, wow, they're going forward, whereas the other dance was laid back.
There's a momentum there in the movement to...
Yes, like almost like skating. You know, when you skate, you go this way, so they're going...
When you watched the Ghawazi, what was the feeling that you sensed from that dance?
A very grounded, kind of very relaxed from the waist up. They look like they're hardly moving, and they're not putting a lot of energy into it, like, no, they're just like, nothing. And then their hips are going, and the costumes, the original costumes that we wore were weighted and full so that when the hips would move, the skirts would really swing and just fly up in the air. And they even padded underneath to make the skirts buoyant, so they would undulate with all the shimmies.
You know, you brought up something so interesting because all of those types of details. So one of them is about energy. You know, a lot of times I think people, dancers, movers, they get fixated on emulating and copying a movement sequence, a pattern, or the technique without understanding how the energy works. What's supporting that movement? How are you sequencing? Or where is the energy? And when you start to think of it that way, everything changes. From your golf swing to how you swim, how you take a dance class, if you can think of it as how is the energy being used, if you just ask yourself that, it's so different.
That's a very good observant point.
Well, you obviously picked up on it very, you know, early in the game. It's taken a long time to be like, ding, that's an awareness. But like, it's also training your ear for the accent, right? It's like finding that accent when you're speaking a language. If you just know the grammar and the vocabulary, but if the accent is off, you never really get the feeling of what it is you're trying to embody in that culture or that expression. And then the third thing, you talked about those swishy skirts and all of those layers. When they do historical drama or period drama, like say Mad Men, that would count. You know, if you have people wear the undergarments that were reflective of that period, whether that's like a conical bra or garters and stockings, or for gentlemen wearing an undershirt or whatever it is, that changes the way you move your body because you're going to the inner layers and then you're building out. And so I think a lot of times when you see these kind of flimsy costumes that are supposed to look like the 70s, or, you know, oh, I'm a hippie, or, you know, I'm going for a 1940s look, but if you don't have the proper undergarments, you don't carry your body the way, and then the clothes don't fall the same way. So you never get that complete sensation of what you're trying to represent.
Very important. The two things dictate the movements. The music.
Right.
The music is the choreographer. But then how you respond to the music even has to do with the costume you're wearing.
That's true.
If it's a slim skirt that has reining fringe, then it's going to move one way. And if it's full and it layers of things, it's going to move another way. And if you're wearing heels, or if you're barefoot, all these things matter. And there can be legitimate styles for each thing that are both legitimate but different because of the costume.
You know, you talked about the importance of music, and I remember when I first started this wonderful dance, also something that you hear with frequency from people who grew up hearing the music, maybe the countries of origin. If you meet someone who's Egyptian or someone who's Palestinian or Lebanese, you know, it's very common where they'll say, oh, the music will tell you what to do. Like if I would say, well, how did you know when to do this accent, or how do you know when to do that movement? Because it wasn't necessarily explained, because sometimes there's a jump in the cultural shift. I mean, if you're learning something from the Middle Eastern in Hawaii, and before you had a lot of those resources, it might be hard. And a lot of times the simple answer was, oh, the music tells you what to do. And it wasn't until much later that I understood what that meant. It was shorthand for a much more in-depth process of awareness. You know, it wasn't just about steps, but I think a lot of times, perhaps not all Americans, but in America we tend to take a very academic, studious approach about learning steps. But then we forget the context of how that relates to everything else.
Yes.
You know, it's a...
I know my style of teaching all these years has been to just whatever music was on, I was like a guide. So I would dance to that, respond to that, and expect my students to follow me.
Can I tell you? So some of us...
I'm leading them and showing them how you respond to this. Rather than saying, okay, you put your right foot forward and then you twist here and do that, because then you lose the whole spontaneity.
You lose the energy. And I remember the first time I came to your house way back when, and you know, some people affectionately call it follow the bouncing butt, you know? But it's the most, I would say, natural way that everyone learns, whether you're watching mommy or your auntie or whatever it is. You watch and you follow, and we learn so much through observation. And that kind of idea of throwing somebody in the pool and just seeing that they doggy paddle, I mean,
And
at
they,
first I
and
was,
they learn.
yeah, at first you're terrified, but then you end up doing it. You have no time to think, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing and what foot am I in? You just do it.
And then once they learn, they're able to dance to anything.
Yeah, and it's so important to have that ear training, and it's something that I have shamelessly borrowed, and I like to do that as well. You know, we'll just put on a long piece of music, and I call it shadow dancing, and I tell them it's like, it's not to make them feel uncomfortable or to confuse them. I just want them to be able to hear that music in its entirety and just kind of flow with it.
And they don't have to do exactly what you do.
Exactly,
But
yeah.
they become, by exposure to it, they become accustomed and conditioned.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's in their subconscious. Then they don't have to think about a choreography. Of course, when you have a troupe, you have to choreograph.
Right. Otherwise, it could be organized
Oh,
chaos.
yeah.
But there's nothing I feel sadder than going to a Hafla. A lot of people say, Hafla, Hafla, what is this? It's a gathering, music, dance, sometimes food, sometimes libations, sometimes sparkly things. It's where we like to, you know, get together and dance and do Oriental dance, folk dancing, belly dancing. And I just die a little death when I see various people that I know, they're taking dance, and then they just become the professional seat warmer. You know, they don't want to get up and dance, and, you know, they might say, I don't know this music, or I don't have a choreography. It's like, it's not, it's not that. Like, you don't go to the disco and say, wait a minute, I don't have a choreography to this song at the disco, so therefore I'm just going to sit here and drink my Shirley Temple. Like, yeah, you just got to cut the rug and have some fun.
And have the joy of the music.
The joy of the music. Now, we know, a little bird told me that with all these amazing stories, all these amazing adventures, that you're writing a book.
Yes, I am.
She's writing a
Finally.
book. I think they might be called memoirs.
Yes.
You're writing your memoirs, which I'm so glad, because I'm sure you've heard this your whole life with people imploring you to write your memoirs. So you're writing. Do you have a projected a set date, or
no?
Is it going to be the whole kit and caboodle from?
It's going to be, you know, because my memoirs will not include. It's not just about me. It's about everyone I ever met.
Costumes by Bob Mackie. Yes, it's true.
Yes.
It's true.
I mean, I think it will never get all published, because it would be like 6 volumes. But I'm doing it for me, because it's like, when I was young, I used to write even more. I never would stop writing, but now I'm doing so many other things.
Yeah.
But I remember I was told, well, writing is what's something you do when you're older. So now that I'm older, I understand what that means, because it's a process by going back and writing about all your experiences and all the people you knew and all the things you did and how this affected this and this and this. It's like reliving your life.
Yeah.
And
Queen for a day.
Yes, and by reliving it, you're putting things into perspective that you were unable to do when you were younger.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to share with us before we part for the show? Maybe a little cone of wisdom.
Ah, they put me on the spot.
I know. Suddenly the seat got hot.
Well, life is wonderful, and enjoy the moments, and
dance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't walk if you can dance.
Right.
I'm so honored that you would come on to the show and share your expertise and your insights and your aloha. And thank you so much, Aisha. You've contributed so much to the world of dance and of music, and to be a cultural warrior, to assert that there's value and importance and significance in these arts. And every dancer and every musician is indebted to you. So thank you.
And thank you. And I'm so happy that the dance brought your acquaintance to me, and we became friends.
We have to say hi to Janie. Hi, Janie. Well, we'll see you next week on The Art of Life, where we will have yet another fascinating guest with another fascinating topic. Please stay tuned. We have another great show here on ThinkTech Hawaii.